right, so here we are. Me, Catherine Purple Voodoo, you, Joel Vielhoden, and we are finally getting at this conversation about resilience, relief, recovery, resilience that we've been kind of flirting with the edges for the past, whatever it's been now, 8 weeks. Have we been in like
Yeah,
isolation
probably
for
a
eight
couple of
weeks?
months.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
it definitely feels like much longer,
It
but
seems like a year and a week at the same time.
no, I think it's been an interesting 8 weeks, right? I mean, for a lot of us, COVID, I'm not even going to use the U word, the unprecedented word anymore, but it's something that caught us all by surprise. It's radically changed the way we look at the world and the way we look at our work, and even our personal lives. And I think through that, as you and I have had discussions, this whole thought process around how do organizations process that? How do they work through it and understand that there are going to be stages along the way that if we're aware of where we're at and understand what's coming, I think it's much easier for us to push through, but to keep both our people, our processes, all those types of things in mind.
Yeah. And when you say organizations, I'm even thinking of the conversations that we've had around, family units
Hmm.
or communities, or just even a partnership of two, right?
Right.
And like this human experience and the, um, what we're going to be talking about today is both an individual as well as a collective experience. And so it doesn't have to be just business focused, right? It's really sort of an interesting application right across the board, certainly within business, but you know,
Absolutely.
yeah,
No, and we're seeing that in our local communities, right? I mean, it's not just a business piece or an individual piece. We've got communities that are trying to decide how do we reopen, how do we uh, embrace the new pieces of this, and what do we do with the old, right?
yeah,
And so, and there's a lot of debate on what that should look like, or how it should look, or how fast it should go, and that's all great. But I think it's important for us to understand that that's going to be a process for each individual, right? I
yeah,
mean, they're going to be. I might be more comfortable about some of that than you are, and that doesn't make one of us right or one of us wrong. But I think we need to be able to process that whole both learning and change curve that each of us go through, and then individually as a community or as a group in a community that we go through, and then that same thing's happening in a workplace. It's happening in our religious institutions. It's happening all over.
yeah, yeah. And when you mention the word, it's a process that we go through. I mean and you mentioned change, and it brings to mind some of the well-known, models around change and transition and process. Is that relatively expected series of feelings and experiences that people go through when a change happens, that an external thing happens. But that process, that transition, that human experience really does take time. And there's no one, it's not a one size fits all, which is Joel goes through it exactly the way Catherine goes through it, exactly the way, Johnny goes through it. That's a really interesting thing to observe these days too. Even the expectation that there'll be some really clear bookends about, okay, COVID happened and then it's going to end and then we're going to do this, and like, well, not so fast.
Absolutely. And I think if we learn from the past at all, I mean, you look at what happened with the Spanish flu. I mean, you had people that by necessity just had to go right back to work. Completely different. Work looked very different right then, and so they didn't really have a choice. There are other people that it took multiple years for them to feel comfortable and feel safe again. Um, and so, I think that's something for us to even understand is we don't not yet know how this is all going to play out. We can't predict the future. We can't predict how people are going to respond. Um, and so as we think about this change process and to your point, how each of us are going to go through it, how long it may take each of us, there's going to be some friction and rub in that
Yeah.
where, I'm through the process and you're not, but we have to work together. And what does that look like? And how do we do that in such a way that can be constructive and productive?
Yeah. Or you're through the process. I don't know if it's an Iowa Toronto thing, but but you're through it today, but as we know that it's also not just a very linear chunked out experience. So you might be through it today, but tomorrow you have a setback.
Absolutely.
It's like grieving. People say, oh, it's been whatever amount of time, this prescribed amount of time, X happened, and now you've gone through this. And I experienced it this way, so why aren't you there? And you might have been there last week, but guess what? There's going to be waves of emotions and setbacks and progress. So you've got all these humans going through this non-linear, very complex, multifaceted journey of transition and process all at the same time.
Absolutely. And what is interesting to me, I've been, from a family perspective, been very blessed to not have any immediate impact from a health perspective to my direct family or extended family. But 3 months from now, I feel like right now people are saying, I'm kind of over this. I just want to move on. But 3 months from now, if something like that were to happen in my family, I'm actually going to start that change curve all over again.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very different type of change. And whether, that was something that's more of an inconvenience all the way up to a catastrophe, I'm going to have to process that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really important point, and something that I've been reflecting on in the last couple of weeks as we start to loosen restrictions and people start to, quote unquote, engage with some, normal pre-COVID behavior, albeit adjusted. But there is still, and hopefully for most people, there is still but we don't know when the other shoe will drop individually. And you're right, with your small family unit or your small community unit. And I think we have to be quite cautious of thinking that just because there's some return to a more relaxed or more open space, that we're back to normal. That back to normal, I think, is a concerning mindset to have, as opposed to keeping a really open. Who knows what the future looks like? Be willing to observe and kind of lay down the bricks as you're walking on them.
Yeah. And I think what's going to be fascinating and maybe even a little bit frightening is, again, regardless of your position on how quick to go back or whatever else, I think for some of us, we're falling back into the trap that we had when we were teenagers, that whole invincibility complex. And so if it hasn't affected me as of yet, if I'm still working, financially I'm doing okay, I kind of project that out, right? Well, this is never going to impact me. I could never get sick. I could never. The problem with that, whether that's on an individual level or an organizational level, and we're seeing this in our part of the country, and I think in your part of the country too, organizations that up until this point have really not been affected, all of a sudden have an outbreak. If you're in a meatpacking plant or a manufacturing location or even a service or retail location, and all of a sudden you have a breakout, what do you do? Yeah. And so it's also, I think the frightening part of that is I think we can get lulled into this invincibility complex. And then when something happens, we're going to find that we're not prepared. And so I look at that and I say, I feel like the slow progressive, how do we start opening things up makes sense. But we just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen.
That kind of brings to mind the genesis of this conversation many weeks ago, when you brought to our discussion the notion of disaster relief and disaster recovery, right? There are very specific stages of disaster hits, okay, a change, an external event. And then you have various, leadership or behavioral necessities, strategic imperatives that you do during the disaster relief phase, and that you do then as you move into the recovery phase. And it's interesting to note now that it's less clear cut from, okay, there was a hurricane. Now we do the disaster relief thing and we get to a certain stage and we move into the recovery, and then done, we're back to normal. And right. We wait for the next hurricane, but it's fairly, and this is indifferent in that there will be multiple waves, for the next, who knows, months, right. years. And that led us to thinking about how do you move from relief to recovery to resilience, and in fact begin building resilience all the way through, like right from the get-go. Start having those conversations, start thinking about what kind of um, behavioral or thinking patterns and habits that you need to cultivate, so that as the next wave and the next wave and the next wave happens, you're actually building that resilience muscle, so that people are able to not be pushed right back to square one every time we're hit with another, oh my gosh, there was an outbreak again.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when we originally started thinking through this concept, and I'm a more visual kind of a story person. I'm trying to get this together as far as an analogy, and we talked about it would be a lot like a major flood. I think about in Iowa in 1993. I remember living through one of the largest floods we've ever had, and for some people in the midst of that, relief looks a lot like a flood, right? It's a hurricane, a flood. I'm in the water. During the relief phase, what I need is for you to pull me out of the water and somehow get me safely to shore.
Yeah.
And this isn't the time to talk about, hey, how do we rebuild your house, and what's the block going to look like when it's all done, and what flowers are we going to plant? No, it's a completely different phase. It's all about our basic needs at that point. And I think for many of us, we're still in the relief phase as we think about COVID. Now, there are some parts of the country that I feel like have started to move on to maybe a recovery phase, or at least starting to dip their toe in that. But in places like New York City, places like Italy, elsewhere, I think they've seen an extended relief phase.
Yeah.
And now as we move into recovery, it's going to start to feel very different. But I think on the individual basis, we're still going to have this whole, no, I still feel like I'm in relief. I need my basic needs taken care of. I need somebody to help me out. I'm not ready to step into what could be yet. I'm still mired in what is.
Yeah. And it's interesting, as you mentioned that, it reminds me of a team that I'm working with. We had our first conversation about managing through uncertainty. Like, you're a functional business unit, and you have to not only deal with yourself as a human being, and you're within a family unit, you're also a functional business unit, and you have all these cross-functional partners. You work in an organization, you're trying to actually do work all remotely, all virtually, all whilst being pretty concerned humans, right, about myriad issues. And the interesting thing is, so the first time we chatted, which was, I think, early April, we spent a lot of time just on the human condition, right? That noticing that the deep, like Maslow stuff, right? I really just want to make sure I'm safe. I've got enough food. I've got enough flour to make the bread, right? I've got enough toilet paper, all that stuff. I'm really thinking about food, shelter, security, safety, all of that stuff. Fast forward 5 weeks when we had our next session, it was really interesting. We reconnected on the human stuff first. I said, how's everybody doing? And they're like, it's really interesting. The first few weeks, I was really just focused on that. And it was, batting the hatches. And now all of a sudden, I'm really interested in setting routine and looking to try to bring in some, tactical behaviors around structure and productivity. And how do I, in fact, do my job even better? And how do I, in fact, set some boundaries with loved ones or with work colleagues? How do I, in fact, learn some new applicable skills? So it's interesting, they even themselves noticed I moved from very specific relief mode to starting to flirt with the idea of recovery, which is, how will I actually live in this new reality? Doesn't mean that they're out of it, but it was interesting for them to notice that they had gone through that transition. It's cool.
I think as part of that discussion, and it's an area that you work brilliantly in around, how do we as people, how do we treat people, as humans through the process, is some organizations did fall into a trap very early on. It was about, how do I give you the tech you need? How do we do meetings? Let's throw Zoom at you. Let's be on Zoom all the time. And we forgot about the person. And I think for many of the organizations that started with the people, it's like, are you okay? How can I help you be better? Right? How do I make sure you're taken care of? I guess I would assert that many of those organizations are further down the path than those that started with the whole tactical basis, right? Let's make sure you can still do work. And then the problem with that is, and we heard this, many people jumped into work, and within a week they were exhausted.
Yeah.
Because physically, mentally, spiritually, they had give the entire time, and they weren't taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, they start to break down, the team starts to break down, and then we're trying to put a Band-Aid on a situation that we really should have addressed early on. And I know that's a big part of your work. I'd be interested to see how you've experienced that with some of your clients or those that you work with.
Yeah, and myself, right? Like I know we've talked about too how we too, as humans dealing with this, also kind of jumped in like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And then you get to the point where like yesterday, I was like, I'm feeling pretty burned out. All of a sudden, I think I've been going, I needed a couple days off. But to that question, well, to your comment and question, I'm hearing from many of my clients individually and even my client groups that people are burning out right now. Mm-hmm. Burning out, even though they work with and for well-intentioned organizations, well-intentioned leaders. If you ask these leaders, are you a people-centric organization? Do you have a people-centric focus? They would all say, of course we do. We're a values-based organization. We feel very strongly about the well-being of our people and of our balance. And yet, the ecosystems that they've created and maintained do not, in fact, support that. So what I hear explicitly and also just through the grapevine is people are now on Zoom and or whatever. There's myriad tech platforms, digital platforms, you name it, Slack, Jabber, Zoom, Meetings, Google, I don't even know. They are on it from sun up to sundown, and now they're Zooming all their friends, and they're supposed to be having house parties and talking to their mom and their extended family. They are literally in front of a computer all day, and they're completely burned out.
Absolutely.
And so I think now, I'm hoping now, and to your point, I think that the companies and the organizations and the leaders individually even who focused on, hey, Joel, yes, I want you to get work done. How are you sleeping? Are you getting any exercise? Like, just don't sit in front of your computer for more than 90 minutes at a time. Please absolutely say no to that third meeting. I think that they're probably not hitting that burnout as quickly as the others. But the time is upon us when that's happening. And then again, burnout is not a new thing either. People will stop being productive. Work will stop being, as efficiently done, as meaningfully done. We will stop seeing the kind of, attention to outcomes and adherence to strategic focus that we do when the human machine is actually operating more effectively.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? I went off on a tangent.
Well, so I think, and maybe to riff off of what you said, I think one of the things that what's the word I'm looking for? I think one of the things that we struggled with very early on as organizations and individuals is in that tactical, how do I do my work? How do I keep on top of my family? All those types of things. We focused on communication, and I'm not so much, I think we confuse that with connection. Yeah. Right. And so we did a really good job in organizations of saying, hey, let's get on Teams or let's get on Slack or let's make sure we're on a phone call first thing in the morning to make sure everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And I'm not going to degrade the importance of that, but I think we leaned on that too much to really be a connection point too.
Yeah.
And so for you and I to get on Zoom and just talk is very different than you and I getting on Zoom to have a meeting, right? Or to get through a project. And I think we miss all the little nuances of being in the office and what a lot of people are calling like the water cooler talk. But I'm even thinking about the times where, I'm sitting at my desk and I have an aha or I've got a question or whatever, and I can just pop my head up and say, hey, John, what do you think about this? Or here's something that just happened. Can I get your feedback on it, right? And you think that there is that's just communication, but there's a strong connection there.
Yeah.
And for me to have that trust and comfort with somebody, I'm not sure we can totally replicate that online or virtually.
Yeah.
I think there are ways that we can try, and the technology continues to evolve. But when we talk about the difference between relief and recovery, I think we have to think about and the human condition in the midst of that relief. Are we creating ways to communicate, or are we creating ways to connect?
Yeah.
Because I think if we don't think about that valuable aspect, it just leads to that burnout. I led a webinar a couple of weeks ago now on this whole the transition to virtual work and leading through difficult times. And I asked the question at the very beginning through the chat and said, how many of you are feeling burnt out? And if you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself? 10 being I'm there, right? I'm done, I'm cooked. To 1 being I'm awesome. I didn't have a single person on that webinar that rated themselves below a 6.
Yeah.
And I had a number that rated themselves a 9 or a 10. And this is 30 days in,
Yeah.
right? And so if some of those folks haven't decided or figured out how to, double back and start taking care of themselves, I hazard to guess that now they're a 12 on a scale of 10, right? They're not only are they burnt out, but they're burning other people out.
Yeah.
And that level of disengagement is going to be hard for us to remedy if we don't get back to that connection and taking care of the people.
Yeah. And it really does come back to balance and well-being of the individual, of the team, of the organization, of the whole, ecosystem. I know we've talked a bit before about, using almost a tech triage approach. I mean, it's great if you can just say, hey, John, but you can, like, I've been trying to not be on Zoom very much. I've been trying to just phone people or text them, a quick little thing for that reason. And you're right, there's certain things that are never going to replicate a live in-person hanging around. But I think even just recognizing the real value and necessity of, and holding each other accountable to that white space, to that like, you have my permission to completely check out for a day or a half day or a few hours. And I won't say, oh, I know you have that space, therefore I will now try and use that space. That's what I'm hearing. But that, just as we don't evolve that fast. we're not used to being on. I was listening to a radio show earlier this morning, and they were talking about Zoom fatigue. And they were saying, like, people, if you think about it on Zoom too, they feel like I'm on camera. Now I'm on camera there's a certain level of I'm on stage now all day, every day. There's a real intimacy. People are coming into my home in some cases. There's such a multi-layered, complex set of newness, of uncharted waters that we're all experiencing all at the same time.
Yeah. As you said that, it reminds me a bit what you hear from celebrities or movie stars, right? Where they get propelled into, they take a certain part, or they have a hit song or whatever else, and they go from being kind of a nobody to somebody everybody wants to watch 24/7.
Yeah.
And that level of, like you said, just being in the spotlight, being under that kind of that critical eye, or and I'm not sure many of us are ready for that.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, as I've worked with people, done coaching, different things like that via Zoom, one of the things that I'm noticing at the beginning, people were okay turning on their cameras, like, hey, let's talk. I want to see people. And now in some ways they're starting to retract from that because they don't want people in their homes. They don't want people kind of peering into their lives all the time. And I'm even seeing some people start to skip meetings, right?
Yeah.
They're just, if you need me, shoot me an email or something else where I can keep that buffer.
Well, and I think, and we talked about this before, likely what is starting to happen is the bad meeting behavior from before is starting to come into our new digital space. And hey, a bad meeting is a bad meeting. So and again, layering on that added complexity of like, I have to be on, I've got to make sure my place is clean, I've got to do all this other stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of layers. I'm finding, I mean, you mentioned coaching using Zoom. I've always preferred coaching over the phone for that reason. And I'm doing it almost explicitly now and solely now over the phone to mitigate just another Zoom call, right?
Yeah.
Or another insert video platform here.
Yeah.
I was wondering if it may be valuable. And you and I kind of fancied up our napkin scratch model when we were talking about our relief, recovery, resilience. Maybe it'd be valuable to just pop it up on the screen and speak really quickly to, how we're kind of thinking about this. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Is where people can see how fancy we are.
It's amazing what some shapes on a PowerPoint slide can do.
I mean, actually, the cool thing is when you look at this, you can actually see how we, in fact, scratched it out on a napkin first, right? It wasn't that difficult. But, I mean, it's kind of cool because what this shows here is what we've been talking about, right? There are separate, relief and recovery stages for sure, and certainly some overlap. But recognizing that there's an opportunity all across that experience to start developing resilience. And one thing that I've been really thinking about over the past couple of weeks in feeling some of that burnout myself, in feeling some of that necessity to find balance is you can't get resilience without going through adversity.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't build the muscle without some heavy lifting and some pain and some muscle tearing. So anyways, maybe just articulate your thoughts on how we came up with this brilliantly executed model.
Well, I think one of the things when we were first trying to process what this looks like, I think one of the comments I made to you was that it was starting to feel very much like this disaster relief. And so I've had the opportunity to actually be part of a couple of those efforts. I was kind of at the end of Tornado Alley, but we, a number of years ago, had a tornado in northern Iowa that essentially destroyed nearly an entire town. And as part of, at that time, I was working in service-based ministry and got an opportunity to be there. I think it hit on like a Saturday. We were there on a Monday, and essentially helping people carry their house to the curb to be essentially ground up and put in a landfill. Mm-hmm. And as I think about that and the shell shock and just really what people were prioritizing at that point, it felt very much like what many of us felt in that first couple of weeks of COVID. Not so much when we thought it was a half a world away, but when it actually hit our shore and it actually hit our communities. And all of a sudden, like you said, we focused inward. How do I take care of myself, my family? How do I make sure what we have is going to be enough? How do I think about my safety? All those types of things. And for many of us, as we mentioned already, that relief phase can last quite a while. The interesting piece for me, and this is where, as you and I spoke about it, if you had asked me originally about resilience, I would have said, well, resilience doesn't really come until far down the line, right? But to your point, in the midst of adversity, that's where we really start to build that resilience, to be able to adapt and overcome some of the situations that we're in. And it's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
And I think when we started building this model, that purple triangle is supposed to be, how does resilience build over time? And at the very beginning, we may not feel like we've got very much resilience. But what kind of struck me is one of the things, at least for myself, that has been helpful in that process is this whole thing, and not to throw another R in here, but this thought about reflection.
Yeah.
And what am I learning along the way? What am I learning about myself that I don't necessarily like, and how I'm responding to this? How am I maybe pushing up against challenges I wasn't really expecting? And what am I going to do about it? So for me, in building resilience during this time period, it's taken a lot more reflection than I've probably done in the past, and truthfully, even what I was comfortable with. Because I always felt like I need to do. I've got to be moving forward. That whole um, that shark analogy, right? If a shark doesn't move forward, it drowns. I don't know what the heck
Yeah.
I don't want to ever get that close to a shark to find out. But I think for many of us, if we don't stop and pause, um, it we move in that other direction, right? We almost become become stuck in place, right? That resiliency is not going to build. And then as we move into that recovery phase, it's the resilience, it's the stacking that we do along the way of, hey, I made it through yesterday, and now I made it through 2 days, and now I made it through a week. It's a little bit too like those folks that are in the addiction and recovery movement, right? It's one day at a time, but I can stack all those days on top of each other.
Yeah.
And now the world looks very different, right? Now I've come up against challenges, and it doesn't matter what the next challenge is. I've got some sort of a baseline that I can work from because I've adapted and overcome before.
Yeah. Yeah. And that the resilience, the stacking also, it's that one day at a time and all of a sudden you've got a bunch, but it also, and that reflection and awareness and and looking back, going, where was I and where am I now, also supports that resilience for when the next wave hits or when the next little setback hits. So you still might go, oh my gosh, seriously? And you can say, okay, here we are. I might be a little bit back. I might be a little bit back into the relief phase. I might be a little bit further back in the recovery phase. But now I've developed that resiliency. I developed that mindset, that mindfulness, possibly a perspective that really does enable me to continue to build that over and just handle the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So although as humans we will continue to go through those fascinating feelings and reactions and thought patterns as we deal with more external events, we're able to handle them with more grace, more presence, more resiliency.
Yeah. And I love the word you just used there, this whole thought process of grace. So for two reasons. One, I don't think we give ourselves enough grace during this process. I think too many of us expect to be experts on change or be able to move through this very quickly and be resilient and be kind of a role model to others. And then when we look in the mirror and realize that's not the case, there's some shame as part of that. I mean, we just don't give ourselves enough grace and understanding. But the flip side of that is, how are we extending that grace to others? And not just the people that may work with us or work on our teams or in our organizations, but just the world at large.
Yeah.
What's been interesting to me, at least in my community, is, and I live in a small rural community, but it's been interesting to see how people now interact with each other. When they first opened things up and you could go out on walks as long as you social distanced, before you would see people running with their headphones on and they would hardly look at you, right? They might give you a little bit of a nod or whatever else. Now, when we've been disconnected for so long, they almost feel like they want to stop and say hello and give you an elbow bump or whatever else. You don't even know the person.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for us to understand then that in that process of giving grace to other people and understanding they don't know any better than we do on how to get through this, but that we can get through it together.
Yeah.
I think that piece of it can be important. Quit trying to be perfect. Quit trying to be, the brave face for everybody else, and be able to say, hey, here's what's going on in my life, and I'm going to give myself grace, and I hope that you'll give me grace as well, and I hope that I extend that to others.
Yeah, it's both the do unto others, but also do to yourself, because there's a duality. Sometimes people, there's the treat others as you'd wish to be treated, and the flip side is sometimes you need that self-compassion, right? Because you might be good at giving and being there for everybody else, but you're just wearing yourself down to the nib.
Yeah.
And I think that grace, that self-compassion, the compassion for the human condition, yourself, your family, and being vulnerable. And I know we talk a lot about, what is vulnerability in leadership or in a partnership. And it's not that you don't have the strength and this resiliency and this capability of being tactically really productive and strategic and getting people out of the floodplains and rebuilding the house. But it does mean that you're willing to open yourself up and share that you're going through these transitional feelings and experiences as well. And that in and of itself is the connection that you talked about earlier, that you get that connection when you feel like, yeah, that guy understands what I'm going through. All of a sudden, my burden seems just a little bit lighter.
Yeah, for me, it's been an interesting study in leadership, right? So if you've read Covey's The Speed of Trust book, and I've really digested that work, one of the things it talks about is people trust people who are vulnerable. Yeah. They don't necessarily trust people that are perfect, right? And so if you do feel like you've got it all together, which you probably don't, and you do feel like you've got all the answers, and you do, the rest of your team are going through some tough times. They look at you and think, this guy has to be completely out of touch, right? Yeah. And they're not going to trust that. But if you're able to say, hey guys, I've never done this before either, but we're going to support each other. We're going to get through this together. I would love your ideas. I'd love your thoughts. I'm going to have some as well. Let's talk through them. Again, it's kind of a lesson in leadership is if I want to build trust with people in the midst of a crisis, I've got to own my own stuff and my own vulnerabilities and be able to share, right? Yeah. If I don't do that, I think we become, artificial, but we're like leadership mannequins, right? Yeah. That look good on the outside, but really have no ability to inspire anybody to follow.
Yeah. Or you stay stuck in relief mode, where command and control works well. Hey, yeah. You go do that. People are like, good, we need that. But you can't stay in that mode through recovery. You can't stay in that mode while you're trying to actually build some resilience with your human compatriots, on this journey. You've got to minimize that stress response that a human has to this situation, which only by minimizing that stress response enables them to access that solution-oriented, creative, innovative, forward-thinking part of their brain that has them go, yeah, this is tough, but okay, let's explore possibilities, right? Like, I'm in, coach, I want to be part of this co-creation of solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of companies are moving into next, right? Is how do we reimagine the way that we do work here? How do we embrace opportunities that we would have never looked at before, but now they've been forced on us, yeah. Right? I think for some, it was we're not going to have people work mobily or virtually or whatever else, and that got forced on us, and now we're like, well, it works. I'm not sure really what we were worried about. But I think there are some people that are like, let's keep doing that. And the others like, no, time out. I don't. For example, my daughter, freshman in college, she flat out told us if this fall classes are online, because she had to do that for a good part of second semester, she may take a gap year. She may just work, because it's like, I don't want to do that again, right? I can learn that way. I don't want to learn that way. And I think there are going to be some people that do that as well. But as we reimagine the way we do work, and the opportunities that affords us, it'll be fun to watch how teams kind of play in that sandbox. Because in some ways, it's going to allow everybody to have an equal voice, because we all equally weren't prepared, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that as we move into the next number of weeks and months, that the majority of organizations don't just create new ways of working at the leadership level. I hope that they really do, open the doors and invite people to co-create and to be truly, some blue sky thinking, and to really keep you think that's a perfect example about university. So you've got kids who do really well online, and then you have kids go, yeah, I don't want to do that. Okay, so that's binary, right? Okay, I'll take a gap year or I'll be fine online. Well, hopefully there'll be some thinking around that, and maybe some new innovative, yet to be discovered way of learning will emerge. We don't know. But even just keeping kids, so in that place, keeping the people who are truly impacted, have them be part of the conversation, have them be part of this co-creation of yet to be imagined, realities.
And I'm hoping that teams and organizations are willing to think, outside the binary. Right? It's either work in the office or work outside the office. It's either virtual or it's face-to-face. It's either command and control, or I think if we can think about ways and I don't know if it's the right word, but kind of a hybrid approach, right? Maybe I would want to work from home a couple days a week, but I want to be in the office, a handful of days a week. And, maybe I do want to go to school face to face for some of my classes, but I want to do virtual for the rest. Or I think there are ways that we can take some of the lessons we've learned from this and take the good and stack it on, the pieces that we kind of long for, right? The way we used to do things. How do we combine those two and really stack good on good and get to better versus returning to your point, like, well, we used to run crappy meetings and now we're going to run crappy meetings virtually, and let's get back to running crappy meetings face to face. Is to be able to say that wasn't working. We found some things that were. Let's actually reinvent this process so that it can be more productive, more effective, and better for everybody.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to perhaps for our next conversation to perhaps go a little bit deeper and broader on the notion of non-binary thinking, right? Because I think that has so many applications, and I think we could really riff off on that for a while. And I'm just, in the interest of time, I don't want to. We could go down just yet another rabbit hole. Be here. That would
be
hours.
Very unlike. It would be very unlike us.
I know. I'm just saying, this one time we might go down a rabbit hole, a tangential rabbit hole, a warren of dens and twists and turns.
There's a lot of rabbit analogies there, only half of which I understand.
Okay, a corn maze. You could go into a very complicated corn maze.
Yeah, very stereotypical, but I'll take it. I'm like 150 feet from a cornfield, so I'll take it.
See, there you go. So as we wrap up here, I mean, the point of us was to talk about the, laying on that application of, relief, recovery, and then building resilience through. Is there any one thing that you are really, that really resonates with you personally, that you're trying to apply and habitualize in some way that kind of fits into this conversation?
Probably two things, and one I mentioned earlier. That this whole thought process of reflection. In general, I'll reflect on pieces, kind of what have I learned, but I don't do a lot of daily reflection. And there are a number of experts out there that talk about keeping a journal and starting your day with priorities and writing that, and I think all of that is amazing. But it really hasn't been until the last 30 days that I've been dabbling in that at all. And part of it was, to be honest, just getting my stuff in order.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're in the midst of busy times before COVID hits, and then COVID hits, and you're like, okay, it just got more chaotic, but it also got a lot more quiet. Right. Business starts to go away. These other distractions start to go away. And so for me to be able to step back and go, okay, what's working for me? What's not working for me? What am I learning from this? What am I going to do different personally, professionally? Who do I need to connect with more? Who do I need to connect with less? Yeah. I mean, that whole reflection process for me has helped build some of the resiliency that I hope sets me up, down the road for other, blips on the radar or bumps in the road. Yeah. The second piece of this is the shared experience, right? I have tried very intentionally to connect with people on a different level, during these last 2 months. Both family. I mean, I've had both of my adult kids living in my home, one of which was getting ready to get married and go off on her own. And so just being very intentional with the time that we have. The flip side of that is I've been spending a lot of time just trying to learn from other people. And so connecting with you, having conversations with you, with other people in our global community, going back to past clients and just asking how they're doing and ways that we can help. And it's that connection for me and that shared experience that helps me not only learn for myself, but learn from others. And I think there's a fair amount of resiliency we can gain by not only sharing the experience with others, but learning from their experience. And I feel like if we don't reflect and if we don't build those connection points, it wouldn't have surprised me that 3 months from now, 6 months, whenever this is done, which I don't know when that would be or how it will be, that I be exactly the same guy I was when this started.
Yeah.
And I think that would be incredible waste of an opportunity.
Mhm.
However horrible this opportunity has been, I think it'd be an incredible waste of an opportunity for us to develop as human beings, develop in our relationships with others, and really start to cast a vision for what could be in the future.
Yeah. It
How about
reminds
you?
me, well, that it just reminds me that statement around as horrible as it's been, there's an opportunity. I heard a quote by a Buddhist master who said, chaos is the wonderful news, which it just means that it affords you a tremendous opportunity for growth and expansion, right? Without something changing, without something, you never adapt or evolve or expand if something doesn't catalyze your reality, right?
Yeah.
And so that's super cool. Yeah, I'm the same. I mean, I am one of those reflection geeks, so I'm pretty consistent with my morning journaling. Sometimes it's 5 lines, sometimes it's 5 pages. It depends. Sometimes articles or blog posts or things emerge from that. Um, some of it is really just, as you say, opening up the brain and getting it out so that I can organize it in a way that has some meaning, and then to separate it, like you say, what do I really want to be doing and what do I need to let go of? And I think that because we have been in our own spaces more than most, and I think most people more than most, even the introverts, I think they're going, well, that's even more than I'm used to. We have been given a really interesting time to reset and to examine the priorities in our lives, to re-examine even some of our belief systems, our values, our behaviors, our thinking patterns, our habits, and to then explore and learn, like, okay, either A, love this and these are things that I want to continue to invest in, or no, I don't and I need to shift it. And then, as we always talk about, great, learn about it, right? Find the right content, then pull it in, layer it into your life and apply it in a way that's meaningful, and do it consistently over time so that you win and you fail and you win and you fail and you grow and expand, and then go, oh, again, reflection period.
What do I need to learn now?
How did that
Yeah.
go for me? What did I learn? So just actually applying that whole methodology to my own life in many ways has been a real gift of this situation.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how many other people I've talked to during this process, and especially people in our industry around leadership and organizational health and that have said, at first this was chaos, but now I'm embracing the opportunity, right? I'm going to learn more. I'm going to work on parts of my business that I've been saying for 10 years that I needed to, tweak or edit or multiply or subtract or whatever. And so that's intriguing to me that we're seeing. It will be, and I don't know if we'll ever have this data, but it'll be interesting to see 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what this period, the kind of the domino effect or the ripple effect it's going to have on individuals and organizations. Are we gonna come out much stronger? One of the statistics or facts that was thrown out there was many organizations have actually navigated more change in the last 3 months than they had in the previous 5 years. And so they're making 5 years of progress in 3 months.
Yeah.
And so where's that, what is that going to do from a world perspective? Where are we going to be, 3 months from now? Where are we going to be 5 years from now? And hopefully we're going to be on a better path.
Yeah. And we'll be more resilient and,
Yes.
and able to take the next thing, right? And approach it in a more resilient way, which would be cool.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of our time, so I don't want to, but I'm gonna.
Well,
Anyway,
this has been fantastic.
yeah. So, well, I think I'm gonna note down our sort of non-binary thinking for our next chat, if that's cool with you. Why don't we circle back and plan to do another one?
That sounds great. I always look forward to our talks.
Yeah, me too. Take care of yourself.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.